Most people today would say they're atheists. Not because they've looked very deeply, but because they assume human intelligence is the highest form there is. The story goes like this. There was a big bang, things bumped into each other for a very long time, and somehow, by accident, meaning showed up. But if you're actually paying attention, if you pause for a moment and look up and really look around, that explanation starts to feel a bit thin. Because what you see is not just randomness slowly organizing itself. You see patterns, you see timing, you see an extraordinary sense of order that doesn't seem to struggle to exist. From the way galaxies move, to the way your heart knows exactly when to beat, there is an intelligence at work that doesn't ask for permission and doesn't need applause. And yet, most people live as if none of this is aware, as if life were unconscious, indifferent, and slightly hostile. So they fight it, they resist it, they try to impose their will on everything. But resistance is not intelligence. It's simply forgetting that the same force holding the stars together is also holding you right now. And this misunderstanding has consequences. Because the more a person believes life is unconscious, the more they feel they must force everything to happen themselves. They resist, they push, they struggle. And the more they resist, the more they suffer, not because life is cruel, but because they are fighting an illusion. They are living as though reality were made only of matter, only of objects to be controlled, only of outcomes to be seen. But life does not operate that way. It moves as an underlying order, a living process, a self-organizing flow that cannot be reduced to thing. When you forget that, you experience poverty, not merely as lack of money, but of ease, clarity, and support. Poverty begins the moment you believe you are separate from the very process that is sustaining you. Poverty in its deepest sense has very little to do with numbers, income, or possessions. Those are only the surface. Poverty is a feeling. The feeling that life is not on your side, that existence is withholding something from you. It is the quiet assumption that nothing is listening, that nothing is responding, that you are on your own in a vast, indifferent universe. From that assumption, behavior follows naturally. You become anxious about the future. You cling to what you have, you hesitate, or you overreach. And strangely enough, the more you try to escape poverty from that state, the more real it seems to become. Because when you act from the belief that there is not enough, every action confirms that belief. Poverty is not a condition imposed from the outside. It is a relationship with life shaped by mistrust. And as long as that relationship is unchanged, no amount of effort, intelligence, or strategy can bring the feeling of enough. The first key, then, is trust. Not blind belief, not positive thinking, but a quiet recognition that life knows what it is doing. To trust God does not mean waiting passively for things to happen. It means stopping the inner argument with existence. It is realizing that the same intelligence that turns an acorn into an oak tree, that moves the tides and holds the planets in place, is not suddenly confused when it comes to your life. Most suffering comes from trying to replace this order with control. The mind says, I must manage everything, or it will all fall apart. But the mind itself is something that appeared without your permission. When you say, I give this to God, you are not abandoning responsibility. You are abandoning panic. Trust is allowing life to carry the weight it was designed to carry, instead of insisting that your thoughts must hold the universe together. And strangely enough, when you stop gripping so tightly, life begins to move again. Now, trust does not come from thinking harder. In fact, thinking is usually the very thing that gets in the way. The mind has a peculiar habit. It talks to itself about itself and then gets lost in the conversation. It goes round and round, trying to arrive somewhere it already is. You can talk to God, of course. People do it all the time. But they often forget that listening is the important part. And listening does not mean waiting for a voice in the sky. Life answers in a much subtler way than that. It answers through a hunch, through timing, through the strange feeling that something is simply right without your being able to explain why. The mind dislikes this enormously because it wants reasons, guarantees, and insurance. But God is not interested in contracts. When you stop chasing certainty, when you allow the mind to fall quiet for a moment, you discover that you are already being guided, not pushed, not commanded, but gently carried like a current that moves the swimmer. The moment they stop thrashing about, that is what trust actually is. Now, the second key is gratitude, and this is where it is very easy to misunderstand what is being said. Gratitude is not politeness. It is not saying thank you because it is socially appropriate, and it is not a performance meant to impress anyone, including God. Gratitude is a way of seeing. It is the simple recognition that before you have done anything at all, life has already begun giving. You did not decide to wake up this morning. Your heart did not consult you before it started beating. Your breath arrives and leaves without asking for instruction. Life is always moving, always giving, always flowing forward. The difficulty is that most people are trying to move against this flow, insisting that life go their way, on their timetable, according to their ideas of how things should unfold. And when life does not obey, they conclude that nothing is listening. But gratitude changes this entirely. The moment you feel genuinely grateful, you are no longer arguing with existence. You are acknowledging that something is already happening. And this is important because life does not respond to demand. It responds to recognition. Gratitude is the recognition that you are seen, that you are heard, and that what you are asking for is already being answered, though perhaps not in the form you expected. When you stop standing in the way, the movement becomes obvious. You begin to notice opportunities you could not see before, timing that feels strangely precise, and a sense of being carried rather than pushed. This does not mean life becomes predictable. It means it becomes cooperative. When you follow the flow, instead of fighting it, you do not need to force yourself toward where you want to be. The current takes you there, not because you manipulated it, but because you stopped insisting that it go somewhere else. So you see, trust and gratitude are not separate practices. They are two sides of the same understanding. Trust opens the future. Gratitude sanctifies the present. Without trust, the future feels threatening. Without gratitude, the present is experienced as lack. Together, they end the inner argument with life. And that argument is the real source of poverty. Because when you are internally at war, every experience is interpreted as resistance, delay, or denial. You begin to feel that life is holding something back, that you must struggle to receive what should already be yours. But when the inner war ends, something quite curious happens. Life no longer feels the need to withhold, not because it has changed its attitude toward you, but because you have stopped approaching it as an enemy. You are no longer bargaining, no longer trying to force outcomes into existence. Instead, you are participating. And participation has a very different quality from control. Control is tense, anxious, and exhausting. Participation is relaxed, attentive, and responsive. In that state, you act more clearly, you notice more accurately, and you move at the right moment, rather than too early or too late. What disappears is not effort, but the sense of struggle. And with the disappearance of struggle, poverty as a way of experiencing life quietly dissolves. Now, there is one more thing that must be understood. The mind, for all its cleverness, has a curious tendency to trip over itself. It is a wonderful servant, but a terrible master. The mind is forever in search of certainty. It demands assurances, predictions, conclusions in advance. It insists on knowing how the story ends before it will permit a single moment of ease. Yet life offers no such guarantee, only movement. And the mind's refusal to rest is not wisdom, but fear dressed up as foresight. And so it goes round and round, replaying the past, imagining the future, arguing with possibilities that do not yet exist. In doing this, it creates a sense of urgency and lack. The mind says, I will trust life when it proves itself to me. But life does not work that way. Life asks for participation first, and explanation later, if at all. When you allow the mind to lead, you begin to experience life as a problem to be solved, rather than a process to be lived. And from that position, poverty feels inevitable, not because resources disappear, but because your attention is trapped in fear, comparison, and endless calculation. The moment you see this pattern, you are no longer completely inside it. And that small distance, that ability to watch the mind instead of obey it, is the beginning of freedom. And in that small gap, the need to interfere falls away. There is no inner argument, no frantic calculation, no demand that life explain itself in advance. You begin to feel supported rather than tested. It is the moment one stops pretending to be the manager of the universe and allows life to resume its own intelligence. To surrender to God, in this sense, is not to hand oneself over to an external ruler, but to recognize the deeper order in which one is already participating. The mind imagines God as something separate, something to be appeased or consulted, but this only repeats the old habit of control in religious disguise. True surrender is far simpler. It is the willingness to let go of the tension that says, I must hold this together. It is trusting that the same power that breathes your lungs without instruction does not suddenly abandon you when decisions arise. When you surrender, you discover the current was always there. What changes is that you stop swimming against it. By letting go of the illusion of control, you are carried into a new path. It is a return of weight to its proper place. You were never meant to carry life alone. You were meant to live inside it. When you stop approaching existence as something to be conquered, its supporting nature becomes obvious. Action remains, choice remains, effort remains, yet the strain quietly dissolves. There is a shift from forcing to responding, from tension to cooperation. In that atmosphere, movement resumes, sometimes slowly, sometimes unexpectedly, always in its own way. When trust is present, and what is already given is clearly recognized, the sense of poverty fades. Life is no longer resisted, and what appears in its place is a steady confidence of being seen, of being guided, and of moving together with the current that carries everything.